My neighbor blocked my path at the mailboxes and said, "Why do you keep avoiding me, Nathan?" And I looked at Melissa Harper, the woman who'd moved in 6 months ago with boxes full of grief and a smile she'd forgotten how to use, and told her the truth I'd been running from. Because looking at you hurts. I'm Nathan Cross, a paramedic who spent 12 years saving lives in this small Virginia town, and I've been avoiding my neighbor every single day since the moving truck pulled up next door. Every morning when she steps onto her porch, I step inside. Every time she waves across the fence line, I find urgent reasons to check my truck. Every time she tries to say hello at the grocery store, I suddenly remember something in a different aisle. For 6 months, I've perfected the art of disappearing the moment Melissa appears. But this morning, she'd had enough. Cornered me between the mailboxes and the hedge where I couldn't escape without physically pushing past her, and demanded to know why her neighbor, a man she'd never done anything to, a man she'd tried so hard to be friendly with, kept treating her like she carried some contagious disease. "Looking at you hurts," I said again, because she was staring at me with those green eyes that were so much like another pair of green eyes I'd watched close 3 years ago, and I couldn't think of any lie big enough to cover the truth. Melissa's face went pale. Her hand, raised to point an accusing finger, slowly dropped. "What does that mean?" Her voice came out small, wounded, like I'd just confirmed every fear she'd been carrying. "What did I do to you? Why does looking at your neighbor hurt?" I stood there, mail clutched in white-knuckled hands, and tried to find words that wouldn't shatter both our worlds. But how do you tell a woman that looking at her means seeing the 8-year-old daughter who died in your arms? That avoiding her is the only way you can breathe without drowning in guilt? That you know her name, her address, her birthday, her favorite coffee order, and the exact sound of her scream in a hospital waiting room, not because you're her neighbor, but because you're the paramedic who failed to save the only thing she ever loved? How do you tell your neighbor that looking at her hurts because she's living proof of your worst failure? That every time you see her smile, you remember her daughter asking you to tell mommy she loved her? That avoiding her is penance for the life you couldn't save? And how do you tell her the part that makes it even worse? That somewhere in these 6 months of avoiding her, of watching her from windows and listening to her cry through shared walls, you'd done the unforgivable? You'd started falling in love with the woman whose life you'd destroyed? But Melissa was still standing there, waiting for an answer, and I could see the exact moment she decided she wasn't going anywhere until I explained why her neighbor found looking at her so painful. "Tell me," she said, and her voice carried something I didn't expect. Not anger, not hurt, something that sounded almost like recognition, like maybe she already knew part of the answer and was just waiting for me to catch up. "Tell me why looking at me hurts, Nathan, because I've been avoiding something too, and maybe it's time we both stopped running." Wait, she'd been avoiding something? What did my neighbor know that I didn't? And why did the way she said my name sound less like a stranger and more like someone who'd heard it before, in a context I couldn't imagine? The October wind picked up, scattering leaves across the sidewalk between us. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, a car door slammed. Normal sounds in a normal neighborhood where two people stood frozen in a moment that was about to change everything. "You really want to know?" My voice came out rougher than I meant. "You really want to know why I can't look at you without feeling like I'm drowning?" "Yes." She didn't hesitate, didn't back down. Just stood there in her faded jeans and oversized sweater that looked like it belonged to someone else, someone bigger, maybe someone who wasn't here anymore. "I've spent 6 months thinking I did something wrong, thinking maybe I'm too broken, too sad, too much of a reminder that bad things happen to good people. I need to know if I'm right or if there's something else." The mail in my hands crumpled. Bills and advertisements, meaningless paper that suddenly felt heavy as cement blocks. 3 years ago, I started, then stopped, tried again. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday night in the rain, I responded to a car accident on Highway 29. Drunk driver crossed the center line. Head-on collision, 3 victims. I watched her face, watched for the moment recognition would hit, but she just stood there, waiting, and I realized she wanted to hear all of it, needed to hear all of it. There was a little girl in the back seat. 8 years old, brown curls, green eyes, pink backpack with unicorns on it. My throat closed up. 3 years, and I still couldn't talk about Lily Harper without feeling like someone was crushing my chest. She was conscious when I got there, scared, crying for her mom. I held her while the fire department cut her out of the car, told her she was going to be okay, told her everything was going to be fine. Melissa's hand went to her mouth. But it wasn't fine. She coded in the ambulance. I did everything right. Perfect compressions, perfect rhythm, everything by the book, but sometimes the book isn't enough. I looked at Melissa now, really looked at her, and let her see everything I'd been hiding for 6 months. She died holding my hand. And before she did, she asked me to tell her mommy that she loved her, asked me to make sure her mommy knew she wasn't scared at the end, asked me to promise. A sound came out of Melissa, small and broken and full of 3 years of grief, compressed into one breath. So I went to the hospital, I continued, and I was shaking now, mail falling from my hands to scatter across the sidewalk. Waited until they let me into the family room. And I saw you collapse when the doctor said the words. Saw you scream your daughter's name like if you were loud enough she'd come back. Saw security have to hold you back from running to the morgue. I stood there in my bloody uniform, and I wanted to tell you what she said. Wanted to keep my promise. But the words wouldn't come out because I knew. I knew that telling you she loved you wouldn't fix anything, wouldn't bring her back, wouldn't stop you from dying inside the way I watched you die that night. Tears streamed down Melissa's face, but she didn't move, didn't run. Just stood there taking every word like blows she'd been expecting. I'm the paramedic who held your daughter while she died. I'm the one who couldn't save her. I'm the reason you had to bury an 8-year-old child in a cemetery plot that shouldn't exist. My voice broke. So when you moved in 6 months ago, when I saw you step out of that car and recognized you immediately, I knew I couldn't be your neighbor, couldn't be your friend, couldn't look at you without seeing her, without remembering that I failed the person you loved most in this world. The silence that followed felt like falling. Like the moment before impact when you know the crash is coming, but you're still airborne, still hoping somehow you'll fly instead. And looking at you hurts, I finished, barely a whisper now. Because every time I see your face, I see hers. Every time you smile, I remember her smile. Every time you're in pain, I know I'm part of the reason why. Looking at you hurts because you're living proof that I'm not the hero in the ambulance. I'm just a man who watched someone's whole world end and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Melissa wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. When she looked up, her eyes held something I couldn't read, something that looked almost like relief mixed with pain, mixed with something else entirely. Nathan, she said, and the way she said my name made my heart stop, made me realize this moment was about to become something else, something I wasn't prepared for. I know who you are. The world tilted. What? I know who you are, she repeated, and now I could hear it, the recognition, the certainty. I've known since before I moved here. I've known for 3 years. The words hung between us like smoke from a fire I couldn't see but could suddenly smell burning everything down. You knew, I heard myself say, and it sounded like someone else's voice, someone who wasn't currently having their entire understanding of the last 6 months torn apart. You knew who I was and you moved in next door anyway? Melissa nodded, and fresh tears spilled over. But these weren't the tears from a moment ago. These were different. These looked like relief mixed with shame, mixed with something that made her look smaller, younger, more breakable than I'd ever seen her. I didn't plan it at first, she said, and her voice shook. The house went up for sale, and I was looking to move somewhere new, somewhere that didn't have Lily's room and Lily's toys and Lily's height marks on the kitchen wall. My realtor showed me 3 houses. Yours was next door to the 3rd one. I saw your name on the mailbox. The October air felt too cold suddenly, too sharp in my lungs. I went home that night and pulled out the accident report, the one I'd read 1,000 times, looking for something I'd missed, some detail that would explain why my daughter died. And there it was. Paramedic Nathan Cross responded to scene, provided emergency care, transported patient, declared deceased at 8:47 p.m. She pressed her hand to her chest like she was trying to hold something in. I'd read your name so many times it didn't even look like a name anymore, just words on paper. But seeing it on that mailbox made you real. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just stood there while my neighbor, who apparently wasn't just my neighbor, unmade everything I thought I understood. So I bought the house, Melissa continued, not to hurt you, not to make you face me. I bought it because I needed to understand. I'd spent 3 years hating the drunk driver who killed my daughter, 3 years angry at God and the universe and every single person who got to keep their children while mine was gone. But I'd never been angry at you. Why not? The question came out harsh, desperate. You should hate me. I couldn't save her. I had her in my hands and I couldn't, because you held her. Melissa's voice cut through mine, strong now, certain. Because she didn't die alone on a highway in the rain with strangers standing around doing nothing. She died with someone who cared enough to hold her, to promise, to tell me she loved me even though you couldn't follow through. I read your statement to the police. You said she wasn't scared at the end. You said she went peacefully. Do you know what that meant to me? Do you know how many nights I laid awake picturing her terrified and alone and in pain? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Your report gave me the only comfort I had, the only thing that let me sleep sometimes, knowing someone was there, knowing someone tried. She took a step closer. So I moved in next door because I wanted to see the man who'd held my daughter, wanted to understand who you were, what kind of person spends their life running toward emergencies while everyone else runs away. I thought maybe if I could see you, know you, it would help me make sense of it all. And did it? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. No, she laughed, but it sounded broken. Because I didn't expect you to avoid me, didn't expect you to look at me like I was poison, didn't expect to feel rejected by the one person who'd shown my daughter kindness in her last moments. The guilt twisted deeper. And I really didn't expect this. She gestured between us at the space that felt charged with something I'd been trying not to name. Didn't expect to spend 6 months watching you through windows, watching you leave for work at 6 a.m. in your uniform, watching you come home exhausted and haunted, watching you sit on your porch some nights looking like you carried the weight of the whole world. I didn't expect to start caring about whether you ate dinner or if you were okay or why you always looked so alone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I've been avoiding telling you the truth, Melissa said, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Because somewhere in these 6 months, I stopped trying to understand the paramedic who held my daughter and started falling for the man next door. And I didn't know how to tell you that looking at you hurts me too, but not because you remind me of what I lost. Because you remind me that I'm still alive, that I can still feel things, that grief hasn't killed every part of me, even though sometimes I wish it had because living feels like betraying her. The air between us felt electric, dangerous. Like we were standing on the edge of something that would either destroy us both or save us both, and there was no middle ground. So you moved here to find answers, I said slowly, trying to understand. And instead you found someone just as broken as me. She finished. Someone who understands what it means to lose someone and blame yourself. Someone who knows that grief isn't something you get over, it's something you learn to carry. Someone who looks at me and sees a person, not a tragedy. I see her, I admitted, and the words hurt coming out. Every time I look at you, I see Lily, see her eyes, see her smile in yours, see the life she would have lived if I'd been better, faster, smarter. Stop. Melissa's hand reached out, hovered near my arm, but didn't touch. Nathan, you didn't kill my daughter. A drunk driver did. You tried to save her. There's a difference. Is there? My voice cracked. Because I've spent 3 years thinking if I'd done something different, positioned her differently, started compression sooner, called for backup faster. And I've spent 3 years thinking if I'd picked her up from school earlier, if we'd taken a different route home, if I'd let her spend the night at her friend's house like she asked. Melissa's eyes locked on mine. We can both carry guilt that isn't ours to carry. We can both torture ourselves with what-ifs that change nothing. Or we can stand here and finally tell the truth. What truth? That looking at each other hurts because it makes us feel something we thought we'd never feel again. She said it so quietly I almost didn't hear. That we're both alive when we wanted to be dead. That somewhere in all this pain, we found someone who understands. Before I could respond, before I could process what she was saying, a car door slammed behind us. We both turned. A man got out of a silver sedan parked across the street, expensive suit, cold eyes. Something about the way he moved, predatory and purposeful, made every instinct in my body scream danger. He walked toward us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Melissa Harper," he said, and his voice carried authority that felt wrong. "We need to talk about your daughter's accident. I'm Detective Warren Price, and I've been looking for you for a very long time." Melissa went rigid beside me. I felt her hand reach out and grab my arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and suddenly I was back in paramedic mode, reading body language, assessing threat levels. This detective made my neighbor afraid, and that made every protective instinct I had roar to life. "Detective," I said, keeping my voice level, stepping slightly in front of Melissa. "This is a private conversation. Whatever you need can wait." "Actually, it can't." Price pulled out a badge, flashed it like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Mrs. Harper, the drunk driver who killed your daughter, is up for parole next month. The victim's family has the right to make a statement at the hearing. The DA's office has been trying to reach you for 6 weeks. You've ignored 12 certified letters, 8 phone calls, and 2 visits to your old address." Melissa's grip on my arm tightened. "I don't want to make a statement," she said, and her voice sounded hollow, empty. "I don't want to sit in a room and talk about my daughter's death to a parole board that's going to let him out anyway. I don't want to relive that night." "I understand." Price's voice softened, but something about it felt calculated. "But there's another reason I'm here. The DA is also reviewing the emergency response to the accident. There have been questions about whether proper protocol was followed, whether different decisions might have resulted in a different outcome." My blood went cold. "They're investigating me." I said it flatly, stated it as fact because I could see where this was going. "The paramedic who responded to the scene," Price confirmed, looking at me now, "Nathan Cross. You. There's been a complaint filed by the drunk driver's defense attorney claiming that medical negligence, not his client's actions, caused the child's death. It's a Hail Mary, probably won't go anywhere, but the state requires investigation of all such claims." Melissa let go of my arm, stepped away from me. And for one terrible second, I thought this was it. The moment she realized I really was responsible. The moment looking at me stopped hurting and started being unbearable. But then she turned to face the detective, and what I saw in her face wasn't horror. It was fury. "Medical negligence?" Her voice cut like a blade. "Are you seriously telling me that some lawyer is trying to blame the paramedic who held my dying daughter for what a drunk driver did?" "Mrs. Harper, I'm just here to inform you." "No." She moved toward Price, and I'd never seen her like this, never seen the grief transform into something sharp and dangerous. "No, you're here because some drunk driver wants to get out of prison early, and his lawyer thinks attacking the first responder is a good strategy. You're here because the system cares more about legal technicalities than the truth. You're here because, even 3 years later, my daughter's death is still just a case file to everyone." Melissa started. "Did you know," she said, ignoring me, speaking directly to Price, "that Nathan Cross comes home every night and sits in his truck for 20 minutes before going inside? That sometimes he doesn't go inside at all, just sits there until dawn? Did your investigation tell you that? Did it mention that he spent 3 years torturing himself over a child he couldn't save? That he carried guilt that wasn't his to carry because that's what good people do when bad things happen?" Price shifted uncomfortably. "Did your case file mention that my daughter's last words were asking him to tell me she loved me? That he's the reason she didn't die alone and scared? That he gave me the only peace I've had in 3 years by being there when I couldn't be?" Tears streamed down Melissa's face now, but her voice never wavered. "Because if your investigation is looking for someone to blame, tell them to look at the drunk driver who crossed the center line. Tell them to look at the bar that served him 8 drinks. Tell them to look at every single person who saw him get in that car and said nothing. But don't you dare look at the man who ran toward my daughter when everyone else ran away." The silence that followed felt heavy, sacred, like we were standing in a church instead of on a sidewalk covered in scattered mail and autumn leaves. Price cleared his throat. Mrs. Harper, I'll make sure your statement is included in the investigation file, and I'll tell the DA's office that you'll need more time regarding the parole hearing. Tell them I'll be there, Melissa said. Tell them I'll make a statement. Tell them that drunk driver can rot in prison for the rest of his life, and I'll stand there and make sure the parole board knows exactly what he took from me. But the paramedic? She looked at me, and something in her eyes made my heart stop. The paramedic saved what he could. And that has to be enough. Price nodded, got back in his car, and drove away. Left us, standing there in the wreckage of everything we'd been avoiding saying. You didn't have to do that, I said finally. Yes, I did. Melissa turned to face me fully. Because you've spent 3 years blaming yourself, and I've spent 6 months watching you suffer, and I'm done letting either of us pretend this guilt serves any purpose except keeping us locked in the past. Melissa, I still see her when I look at you. I know. She stepped closer. And I still see the man who held her when I look at you. But Nathan, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe seeing her in me means she's still here in some way, still part of both our lives, still connecting us. I shook my head. Looking at you hurts. I know, she said again, and now she was close enough that I could see the exact shade of green in her eyes, the same shade as Lily's, but also different, uniquely hers. But maybe hurt isn't always bad. Maybe sometimes hurt means you're still alive enough to feel something. Maybe looking at me hurts because it means you care, and caring makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability is terrifying when you've already lost so much. My throat closed up. I moved here to understand the paramedic who held my daughter, Melissa continued, but I stayed because I started falling for my neighbor, the one who fixes my mailbox when it breaks, the one who shovels my driveway before I wake up, the one who left groceries on my porch that time I had the flu, the one who thinks he's invisible but has been the most visible, most present person in my life for 6 months. I'm not, I started, but she put her hand on my chest right over my heart, and the words died. Looking at you hurts too, Nathan. Hurts because you make me feel alive when being alive feels like betraying Lily. Hurts because you're kind and good, and you see me as a person instead of a tragedy. Hurts because I'm falling for you, and I don't know if I'm allowed to fall for anyone, especially not the man who held my daughter while she died. Are we allowed? I asked, and my voice came out broken. Are we allowed to feel this when it's built on her death? I don't know. Melissa's hand stayed on my chest, feeling my heart hammer against her palm. But I know that Lily's last words were telling me she loved me, that her last moments were with someone who cared enough to hold her, that she didn't die alone. And maybe that's what she was giving me. Not just a goodbye, but permission to know that love still exists, that being held still matters, that the people who show up when everything's falling apart are worth holding on to. I put my hand over hers. When you asked why I've been avoiding you, I said looking at you hurts. But that's only half the truth. What's the other half? Looking at you hurts because it reminds me I'm still alive, because it makes me want things I thought died with your daughter, because every time I see you smile I remember that the world keeps turning even after the worst things happen, and that terrifies me. Because if I let myself care about you, if I let myself fall for my neighbor, and something happens, if I lose you too, I don't think I'd survive it. So we're both terrified, Melissa said, completely. Both convinced we're betraying someone by caring about each other. Absolutely. Both standing here hurting because looking at each other reminds us we're alive. Yes. Then maybe we stop running. She said it simply, like it was the easiest thing in the world instead of the hardest. Maybe we look at each other and let it hurt. Let it remind us we're alive. Let it be complicated and messy and painful and beautiful all at once. Maybe looking at each other hurts because it's the only way we heal. I pulled her hand from my chest but didn't let go, just held it between both of mine like something precious and breakable. I don't know how to do this, don't know how to be with someone when I couldn't save the person she loved most. And I don't know how to be with someone who reminds me of the worst night of my life, Melissa said. But maybe we figure it out together. Maybe we take it one day at a time. Maybe some days looking at each other hurts too much and we need space, and other days it hurts less. Maybe we're honest about the pain instead of hiding from it. What if I can't stop seeing her when I look at you? Then tell me about her. Melissa's voice broke. Tell me the things you saw that I didn't get to see. Tell me about her last moments. Tell me every detail you remember, because I've spent 3 years with a hole where those memories should be. Tell me, and maybe seeing her in me becomes something we share instead of something that keeps us apart. I looked at my neighbor. Really looked at her for the first time in 6 months without flinching away. Saw the woman who'd been brave enough to move next door to her grief, brave enough to confront the man who'd been avoiding her, brave enough to defend me to a detective when she could have blamed me, brave enough to stand here and say that looking at each other, even when it hurts, might be exactly what we both needed. Okay, I said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff, like choosing to fall and hoping someone would catch me. Okay, let's try. Let's figure out how to look at each other and let it hurt and let it heal all at once. Melissa smiled, and I saw it. Saw Lily's smile in hers, but also saw something uniquely Melissa. Saw the woman who'd survived the worst thing that could happen to a mother and kept living anyway. Saw the neighbor who'd been patient for 6 months while I figured out how to be human again. Looking at you still hurts, I admitted. Good, she said, because looking at you hurts too. And maybe that means we're exactly where we need to be. I pulled her into a hug, and she came willingly, wrapped her arms around me and held on tight, and I held her back, and for the first time in 3 years, the weight I'd been carrying felt lighter. Not gone, never gone, but shared. Distributed between two people who understood that some pain doesn't disappear, it just becomes part of who you are. We stood there on the sidewalk between our houses, mail scattered at our feet, October wind pushing leaves around us, and let ourselves hurt together, let ourselves be alive together, let ourselves believe that maybe, just maybe, looking at each other was the first step toward healing. 3 months later, Melissa testified at the parole hearing. I went with her, sat in the back of the courtroom while she told the parole board about Lily, about the daughter who loved unicorns and wanted to be a veterinarian, about the hole in her life that would never be filled, about why the drunk driver needed to serve his full sentence. The parole was denied. 6 months after that, I finally told Melissa every detail I remembered about Lily's last moments. We sat on my porch at sunset, and I told her about the pink backpack and the way Lily had squeezed my hand and the exact words she'd said. Melissa cried, but she also smiled, said it helped to know, said it gave her peace. A year after our conversation at the mailboxes, Melissa and I were having coffee on her porch when she said, "I don't think it hurts as much anymore, looking at you." "No?" I asked. "No. Now when I look at you, I see the man I'm falling in love with. I still see the paramedic who held Lily, but I see more than that now. I see Nathan, just Nathan, and that doesn't hurt. That feels like healing." I took her hand. "Looking at you still hurts sometimes, but you were right. It's a good hurt. The kind that reminds me I'm alive, the kind that means I'm feeling something real. We've been together 2 years now. Some days are harder than others. Some days we both wake up and the grief is so heavy we can barely move. But we've learned to carry it together, learned that healing isn't about forgetting or moving on. It's about finding someone who understands the weight you carry and says, 'Let me help you hold that.'" Looking at Melissa still hurts sometimes, but now it hurts the way stretching a muscle hurts, the kind of hurt that means you're healing, the kind that makes you stronger. My neighbor asked why I kept avoiding her. I told her the truth, because looking at her hurt, but what I learned is that sometimes the things that hurt us are the exact things we need to heal. Sometimes looking at your pain means looking at your future. Sometimes the person who reminds you of what you lost is the same person who shows you what you still have. We're not perfect. We're two broken people who found each other in the middle of grief and decided to heal together instead of suffering alone. And every day, we choose to look at each other, choose to let it hurt when it needs to hurt, choose to let it heal when it's ready to heal. Because that's what love is after loss. It's choosing to look. It's choosing to hurt. It's choosing to heal. And it's choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, the thing you've been avoiding is exactly what you've been looking for all along. Have you ever avoided someone because they reminded you of pain you weren't ready to face? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and opening your heart to someone who understood your grief? Drop your story in the comments below, because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is look at what hurts and choose to heal anyway. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that healing is possible even after the worst losses, hit that subscribe button. Because everyone deserves to know that looking at your pain doesn't mean staying in it forever. Sometimes it means finding someone who will help you carry it until you're both strong enough to put it down.